The first flash came before the scream. Sharp. White. Final. It froze Marcus Reid in the doorway, half in, half out, staring at the dying woman he'd spent 10 years pretending didn't exist. His mother. The woman who raised him. The woman he erased. And behind him stood the one person who knew his secret, Victoria Langston, her phone raised, recording everything. Not for memory. For leverage. That single flash didn't just capture an image. It detonated a life. Because Marcus Reid wasn't just a billionaire. He was a lie wearing a tailored suit. And now, the truth had teeth. The hospice room smelled of antiseptic and lilies, the kind that try to mask death but only make it smell sweeter. Machines blinked, slow and tired. And in the middle of it all, Diane Carter, Black American 63, eyes fading but still full of grace, looked up at the son who once promised her the world. She smiled, small, fragile, unstoppable. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. He wanted to answer, to fall to his knees, to tell her he was sorry. But then he saw Victoria's reflection in the glass, still recording. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just goodbye. This was exposure. Every secret he'd buried under designer suits, luxury towers, and the illusion of control, now one flash away from burning everything down. And as Diane's heart monitor beeped softer, Marcus realized the cruelest truth of all. He'd spent 20 years climbing, but the only person who ever lifted him was about to die believing he forgot her. The camera light blinked again. Victoria smiled. And Marcus had to decide, does he save his empire, or his mother's memory? Hello, family. Welcome back to Mr. Harrington Stories. May your week be filled with the courage to face what you've been running from. The courage to stand in doorways you've been avoiding. The courage to look at the people you've loved and hurt and forgotten, and finally say the words that have been waiting in your chest for far too long. Type present if you believe love always finds a way back home. Even when home is a hospice room. Even when love comes with the weight of years you can't get back. And if you believe in second chances, even when they hurt, even when they cost you everything you thought you needed, hit that subscribe button. Because some stories aren't about success. They're about remembering what success was supposed to be for in the first place. Some stories remind us that you can have everything and still have nothing. Let's go back to where it all began. It was a Tuesday when Diane Carter's body finally said enough. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare or warning. Just a quiet surrender in the middle of her shift at Morrison's laundromat, the same laundromat where she'd worked for 40 years. The same cracked linoleum floors she'd mopped 1,000 times. The same industrial washers that hummed and rattled like old friends. She'd been folding towels when the world tilted. One moment, her hands were smoothing wrinkles from white cotton that belonged to someone else. The next, she was on her knees, vision blurring, chest tight, breath shallow and sharp. Mrs. Chun found her first. Screamed for someone to call 911. Held Diane's hand while they waited, whispering prayers in Cantonese that Diane didn't understand but felt in her bones. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. They asked the questions they always ask. Name. Age. Medical history. Emergency contact. Diane answered the first 3. When they got to the 4th, she shook her head. Do you have anyone we can call? Someone who should know you're here? She closed her eyes. He's busy, she whispered. She'd been saying that for 10 years. They took her to Mercy General. Ran tests. Hooked her up to machines that beeped in rhythms she didn't recognize. A young doctor with kind eyes told her what she already knew. Her heart was giving out. Congestive heart failure. Advanced. Years of stress and overwork and carrying weight that wasn't hers to carry. Weeks, he said gently. Maybe a month if you're lucky. Diane nodded. She didn't cry. She'd used up her tears a long time ago. When they moved her to hospice care 2 days later, the nurses brought her warm blankets and asked if she needed anything. She always said no. What could they bring her that would matter? The only thing she wanted, the only person she wanted, was 3 miles away in a glass tower, living a life that had no room for her in it. But there was something tucked beneath her pillow. A photograph. Faded. Creased at the corners from being held too many times. A little boy in oversized clothes, smiling at the camera. 6 years old. Gap-toothed. Hair sticking up in every direction because he'd never sit still long enough for her to comb it properly. Her son. Not by blood. Not on paper. But in every way that mattered. Marcus. She held that photograph now, fingers tracing the edges like a prayer. He'd been so small then. So scared. The system had labeled him difficult. Aggressive. Unadoptable. A white boy nobody wanted, bouncing between foster homes that saw him as a paycheck or a problem. But Diane saw something else. She saw a child who'd learned that love was conditional. That safety was temporary. That the people who were supposed to protect you would leave the moment you became inconvenient. She saw herself. And she decided, right there in that social worker's office, with people telling her she was insane, that she couldn't afford another mouth to feed, that a black woman taking in a white child would cause problems she didn't need. She decided that this boy would never feel unwanted again. So she took him home. To her one-bedroom apartment that smelled like laundry detergent and hope. Fed him mac and cheese from a box because it was all she had. Let him sleep in her bed until the nightmares stopped. And loved him. Fiercely. Completely. Without conditions or expectations or the need for him to be anything other than himself. She gave him everything. Her time. Her energy. Her dreams. She worked double shifts so he could have school supplies. Skipped meals so he could eat. Wore the same coat for 5 winters so he could have new shoes. And she never, not once, asked for anything back. Not gratitude. Not recognition. Not even acknowledgement. She just loved him. And that, she thought now, should have been enough. But somewhere along the way, love stopped being enough. Somewhere between childhood and empire, between struggle and success, between the boy who held her hand in thunderstorms and the man who couldn't return her calls, love became a liability. And she became a secret. Diane's chest tightened. Not from the heart failure. From something deeper. The kind of pain that doesn't show up on monitors or scans. The kind that sits quiet in your ribcage and whispers that maybe you weren't enough. Maybe you failed somehow. Maybe if you'd been different, richer, more educated, more polished, he wouldn't have felt the need to erase you. But she knew that wasn't true. Deep down, beneath the hurt and the loneliness and the slow countdown of her failing heart, she knew. Marcus didn't forget her because she wasn't enough. He forgot her because remembering was too hard. Because the world he'd built had no space for the truth of where he came from. Because admitting he was raised by a black laundromat worker would shatter the myth he'd sold. So he chose the myth. And she paid the price. 10 years of silence. 10 years of watching him on magazine covers and business news, smiling that smile she taught him, wearing success like armor. 10 years of wanting to be proud and angry at the same time. She was both. She'd always be both. But mostly, lying there in that hospice bed with a photograph clutched against her chest, she was just a mother who wanted to see her son one more time. Even if he'd forgotten her name. 3 miles away, Marcus Reid stood in his office on the 42nd floor of Reid Global Headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Chrome and glass. Minimalist furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. The city spread out below him like a kingdom he'd conquered. And he felt nothing. He'd felt nothing for a long time. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Not the rush that was supposed to come with building an empire from scratch. Just emptiness. The kind that no amount of success could fill. His assistant had left 20 minutes ago. The building was quiet now. Just him and the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. Marcus loosened his tie. Poured himself 2 fingers of scotch he wouldn't drink. Stood at the window and stared at the city lights like they held answers they didn't have. He was 38 years old. Billionaire. CEO. Visionary, according to Forbes. Self-made, according to his carefully curated biography. He'd rewritten his origin story so many times he almost believed it himself. Orphaned young. Raised in the system. Worked his way through college. Built Reid Global through sheer determination and innovation. The press loved it. Investors believed it. And somewhere along the way, erasing the truth became easier than defending it. No mention of the woman who worked 3 jobs so he could afford textbooks. No mention of the apartment that had heat only half the time. No mention of the sacrifices she made or the love she gave or the fact that everything he had, every dollar, every achievement, every breath of the life he'd built, was possible because she chose him when no one else would. He'd erased her. Not violently. Not intentionally. Just, gradually. One unanswered call at a time. One missed birthday at a time. One lie at a time. Until the distance between them was so vast he convinced himself it was too late to cross it. Until she became a memory he didn't access. A chapter he'd skipped. A wound he'd covered with expensive bandages called success. His phone buzzed. Marcus glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, guilt, fate, made him swipe. The voice on the other end was professional. Female. Tired. Mr. Reid. This is Evelyn Park. I'm a social worker with Mercy General Hospital. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming before she said it. I'm calling about Diane Carter. She's listed you as next of kin. Listed him. As if he'd been present. As if he'd earned that title. She's in hospice care now, Evelyn continued. Her condition has deteriorated significantly. She has weeks, Mr. Reid. Maybe days. She's been asking for you. Marcus said nothing. I understand this might be difficult, Evelyn said, softer now. But if you'd like to see her, I'd encourage you not to wait. How long? Marcus heard himself ask. Excuse me? How long has she been asking for me? A pause. Then, since the day she was admitted. 10 days ago. 10 days. 10 days of her lying in a hospital bed, then a hospice room, asking for him while he sat in this office, closing deals and attending meetings and pretending the past didn't exist. 10 days. Marcus closed his eyes. Thank you for calling, he said. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. He ended the call, set the phone down on his desk, and stared at it like it was a bomb. The memories came without permission. They always did. Her humming while she folded laundry. Off-key. Tuneless. But constant. Like a heartbeat. The way she cried in the bathroom when she thought he couldn't hear. Quiet sobs she tried to muffle with a towel because she didn't want him to know how scared she was. How close they were to losing everything. The way she smiled when he brought home his first A. Like he'd handed her the moon. The way she held him during thunderstorms. Let him burrow into her side until the fear passed. Told him stories about brave knights and dragons and boys who became kings. You're going to do amazing things, baby, she used to say. I can feel it. He'd believed her. And he did do amazing things. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that she was the reason he could. Marcus's hands shook. He pressed them flat against the desk. Breathed. He'd made her a promise once. After his first promotion. 28 years old, 6-figure salary, future so bright it hurt to look at. I'm going to buy you a house, Mama. Something with a yard. And a porch. Somewhere you can rest. She'd cried. He'd meant it. But he never did it. He bought 12 houses. Investment properties. Vacation homes. Real estate portfolio diversification. But never the one that mattered. Never the one he'd promised her. Marcus opened his desk drawer. Slowly. Like it might bite. Inside, buried beneath contracts and business cards and the relics of a life he built on silence, a photograph. A birthday card, still sealed. And a check. 10 years old. Yellowed at the edges. Made out to Diane Carter. Memo line, I'm sorry I'm too busy. She'd never cashed it. He knew because he'd checked. Every year. Like clockwork. Some masochistic ritual that let him pretend he'd tried. But a check wasn't trying. A check was a coward's apology. And he'd been a coward for a long time. Marcus picked up the photograph. 6-year-old him. Oversized shirt. Gap-toothed smile. Standing in front of Morrison's laundromat, holding Diane's hand. She was smiling too. Young. Beautiful. Full of hope he'd eventually extinguish. He didn't remember when the photo was taken. Didn't remember who held the camera. But he remembered how he felt that day. Safe. Loved. Like he belonged somewhere. When was the last time he'd felt that? Marcus closed the drawer. Then opened it again. Stared at the contents like they held a choice he wasn't ready to make. Go to her. Face the past. Risk everything he'd built on the foundation of forgetting. Or stay here. Safe. Successful. Alone. His phone buzzed again. Different number this time. He knew who it was before he looked. Victoria. Victoria Langston didn't build Reid Global, but she protected it. And protecting it meant protecting Marcus from himself. She stood in her own penthouse now, phone pressed to her ear, watching the blinking on her screen that represented Marcus's location. Still at the office. Good. That meant he hadn't done anything stupid yet. She'd been Marcus's business partner for 8 years. His lover for 2 of those, before they both realized ambition was a better bedfellow than emotion. But she knew him. Knew his weaknesses. His secrets. The things he'd buried that could ruin everything they'd built if they surfaced at the wrong time. And this dying woman from his past, was exactly the wrong kind of surfacing. Victoria had made calls. Discreet ones. Moved Diane to a private hospice facility across town. Paid the bills through shell companies Marcus wouldn't trace. Made sure the media didn't know. Made sure curious journalists hit dead ends. She told herself it wasn't cruel. It was strategic. If the world found out Marcus Reid was the adopted son of a black laundromat worker, that he turned his back on the woman who raised him, that his self-made story was a carefully constructed lie, the brand would shatter. Investors would pull out. Competitors would pounce. Everything they'd built would crumble. So she'd made a decision. Diane Carter would die quietly, comfortably, with excellent care and no cameras. And Marcus would never find her in time. Her phone buzzed. Message from Marcus, "We need to talk." Victoria's jaw tightened. She knew what that meant. He'd gotten the call. And now he was going to do something emotional. Something reckless. She typed back, "Tomorrow." It's late. But she knew he wouldn't wait. The tracking app refreshed. The dot was moving. Marcus was leaving the office. Heading east. Toward the hospice. Victoria grabbed her keys. But even as she moved, something cold settled in her chest. Not fear. Not guilt. Just the quiet recognition that she'd built her entire life on Marcus's lie. And if he burned it down tonight, she'd burn with it. Marcus sat in his car outside the hospice. Engine off. Hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd driven here on autopilot. Muscle memory taking him to the address Evelyn had texted him when he'd called her back. But now that he was here, he couldn't move. Because walking through those doors meant facing her. Meant seeing what his absence had cost. Meant owning the truth he'd spent 10 years running from. The building was small. Brick. Warm light glowing from windows that looked too much like home. Diane was inside. Dying. Waiting. And he was sitting in a $200,000 car, paralyzed by shame. What do you say to someone you erased? What words exist for that kind of betrayal? Marcus thought about the check in his drawer. The birthday cards he never sent. The calls he never returned. He thought about the promises he broke and the life he built on the foundation of her sacrifice. He thought about the fact that she never cashed the check. Never demanded anything. Just loved him. And waited. For 10 years, she waited. And he knew that if he walked away now, if he drove back to his penthouse and his empire and his carefully constructed lie, she would forgive him even for that. Because that's what mothers do. They forgive the unforgivable. They love the unlovable. They wait for sons who forget to come home. But Marcus was so tired of being forgiven. So tired of being loved by someone he'd failed. So tired of running. His hands loosened on the wheel. He took a breath. And he thought, if you were me, would you risk everything to see her, or protect the empire she helped you build? Because that was the choice, wasn't it? Walk through those doors and face the truth. Risk the scandal, the headlines, the collapse of everything he'd worked for. Or drive away. Keep the lie intact. Let her die quietly with dignity, without destroying his legacy. One choice honored her. The other honored everything he'd become. And Marcus Reid, billionaire, CEO, self-made myth, realized that he'd spent his whole life making the wrong choice. Tonight, he was going to make a different one. Even if it cost him everything. He opened the car door. And somewhere behind him, headlights turned onto the street. Victoria was coming. But Marcus was already walking toward the light, and this time, he wasn't stopping. Marcus walked through the hospice doors at 2 a.m. No entourage. No security detail. No assistant clearing the path ahead of him. Just him. And the weight of 10 years pressing down on his shoulders like gravity had finally remembered he existed. The building was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels sacred. Respectful. The kind that knows people are dying here and doesn't disturb them with unnecessary noise. A night nurse looked up from her station. Young. Tired. She didn't recognize him. Didn't know he was worth billions or that his face had been on the cover of Fortune magazine 3 times. She just saw a man in expensive clothes who looked lost. "Can I help you?" Marcus's throat felt tight. "I'm here to see Diane Carter." The nurse checked her computer. Nodded. "Room 14. Down the hall, last door on the left." She didn't ask if he was family. Didn't ask why he was visiting at 2 a.m. Just pointed him in the right direction. Maybe she'd seen enough grief to know that some visits can't wait for morning. Marcus walked slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway smelled like lavender and something medicinal he couldn't name. Soft lights glowed from beneath closed doors. Somewhere, a machine beeped steadily. Proof that someone's heart was still fighting. He stopped outside room 14. The door was half open. Warm light spilling into the hallway. And for a moment, just a moment, Marcus considered turning around. Going back to his car. His penthouse. His empire. Pretending this night never happened. But his feet moved forward anyway. Because some choices aren't really choices at all. Diane was asleep. Smaller than he remembered. Thinner. Her frame barely making a shape beneath the blankets. Her hair, once dark and thick, always pulled back in a practical bun, was gray now. Silver. Spread across the pillow like silk. The machines around her beeped softly. Monitoring things Marcus didn't understand. Heart rate. Oxygen levels. The slow countdown of a life measured in numbers. But what broke him, what made his breath catch in his chest, was her hands. Folded across her stomach. Still holding that photograph. Even in sleep, she held on to him. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time. Just watching. Memorizing. Trying to reconcile the woman in the bed with the woman in his memories. She'd always been so strong. Indestructible. The kind of person who worked 3 jobs and still had energy to help him with homework. Who never complained, never broke, never let him see her struggle. But time had caught up with her. And he hadn't been there to slow it down. There was a chair beside the bed. Standard issue. Vinyl. Uncomfortable by design. Marcus sat. He didn't announce himself. Didn't wake her. Just sat there in the dim light, hands clasped between his knees, and tried to remember how to breathe. The room was small. Pale walls. A window that overlooked a parking lot. Someone had brought flowers, daisies, wilting in a plastic vase. A get-well card sat unopened on the nightstand. It was nothing like his penthouse. Nothing like the world he'd built. But somehow, sitting here felt more like home than anywhere he'd been in 10 years. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time felt strange here. Elastic. Like it moved differently when you were sitting beside someone who was running out of it. And then, so quietly he almost missed it, Diane's eyes opened. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the light. To consciousness. To the shape of a man sitting beside her bed at 2 a.m. And when her gaze found his face, she smiled. Not a big smile. Not dramatic. Just a soft curve of her lips that said, "I knew you'd come." Like no time had passed. Like he never left. Like 10 years of silence could be forgiven with a single moment of presence. "My boy," she whispered. Her voice hoarse from disuse. Fragile. But warm. So warm. "You came." And Marcus Reid, who hadn't cried since he was 12 years old, who'd trained himself to feel nothing, who'd built an empire on the foundation of emotional control, broke. Completely. Tears streamed down his face. Hot. Unstoppable. Years of guilt and shame and buried love pouring out in a way that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I'm sorry," he choked out. His voice raw. Broken. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry." Diane reached for his hand. Her fingers were thin now. Fragile. But her grip was still strong. Still steady. Still home. "Come here, baby," she said softly. Marcus leaned forward. And Diane, dying exhausted, barely strong enough to lift her head, did what she'd always done. She held him, one hand on the back of his head, the way she used to when he was small and scared and convinced the world was going to hurt him again. "I'm sorry," Marcus repeated, over and over, like a prayer. Like if he said it enough times it might undo the damage. "I'm so sorry." Diane let him cry. Didn't shush him. Didn't tell him it was okay when it clearly wasn't. Just held him while he shattered. And when his breathing finally steadied, when the tears slowed to a trembling stillness, she spoke. "I was never mad at you, baby." Marcus pulled back, looked at her, red-eyed, wrecked. "How?" he asked. "How could you not be?" "Because I know you," she said simply. "I know the man you are. And I know what the world does to people like us. How it teaches you to be ashamed of where you came from. How it makes you believe that love is weakness and roots are chains." She paused, coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Marcus flinch. But when she continued, her voice was firm, clear. "I was never mad at you, Marcus. I was proud. You became everything I dreamed for you." Marcus shook his head, tears threatening again. "I became everything except a good son." "No," Diane said firmly, her grip tightening on his hand. "You became afraid. Afraid the world would see you differently if they knew where you came from. Afraid that loving me would make you less in their eyes." She paused. "Let that sink in." "I understand that." Marcus's chest tightened. "You shouldn't have to understand that." "Maybe not," Diane said softly. "But I do." She looked at him, really looked at him, with eyes that had seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. "The world already sees you, Marcus. You're on magazine covers. You're in boardrooms. You're everywhere." She squeezed his hand. "The question isn't whether the world sees you. It's whether you see yourself. The real you. Not the myth you built. Not the story you sold. But the boy who used to help me fold laundry. The boy who was afraid of thunderstorms. The boy I chose when the world said I shouldn't." Marcus stared at her. And in that moment, in that quiet hospice room at 2 a.m., he realized something that made his breath catch. She wasn't asking for an apology. She was asking him to forgive himself. To stop running from the truth of who he was. To stop being ashamed of the love that made him. And Marcus, for the first time in 20 years, didn't know if he could. He stayed until dawn, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, talking about small things and big things and all the years they'd lost. Diane told him about the laundromat, about Mrs. Chen's daughter getting into med school, about the regular customers who still asked about him even though she'd stopped answering. Marcus told her about the company, about late nights and impossible deals and the emptiness that came with success he couldn't share. They didn't talk about the distance. They didn't need to. It sat between them like a third presence. Acknowledged, mourned, but not dwelled on. Because time was too short for dwelling. When the sun started to rise, painting the room in soft orange light, Diane yawned. Exhausted. "You should rest," Marcus said quietly. Diane smiled. "So should you." "I will," he lied. She saw through it. She always did. "Go home, baby. Take a shower. Eat something. I'll still be here when you get back." Marcus hesitated. What if? She squeezed his hand. "I'll be here." He didn't want to leave. But he also knew she was right. He smelled like sweat and fear and the inside of his car. His suit was rumpled. His eyes felt like sandpaper. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll come back this afternoon." Diane nodded, closed her eyes. And Marcus, after one last look at the woman who saved him, stood and walked out of the room. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to fall apart. Victoria found out at 4 a.m. She'd been tracking his location all night, watching the little on her phone stay fixed at the hospice for hours. Watching, waiting, panicking. Because Marcus visiting his dying mother wasn't the problem. The problem was what happened when people found out. When the press discovered that Marcus Reid, self-made billionaire, tech visionary, Forbes cover boy, had a past he'd been hiding. A black mother he'd erased. A story that contradicted everything he'd sold the world. The brand would implode. Investors would panic. Competitors would strike. And Victoria, who'd spent 8 years building her career on Marcus's success, would lose everything. So she did what she always did when things threatened to spiral. She took control. At 6 a.m., she made a call. To Derek Chun, tech blogger, hungry for clicks, willing to run stories that traditional outlets wouldn't touch. She gave him just enough. A lead. A source. A carefully constructed narrative that was half truth and half fiction, but fully calculated. By 8 a.m., the story was live. Reid Global CEO's secret past, adopted by struggling single mother, then abandoned her. The headline was designed to bleed. And bleed it did. Victoria had been careful. She made Marcus look sympathetic. Made it seem like he'd been forced to distance himself. That Diane had been unstable. That he'd been paying her bills anonymously for years out of guilt and obligation. It was a lie. But it was a lie that protected the brand. Protected him. Protected her. The story went viral in minutes. Tech blogs picked it up. Then mainstream news. Then social media. By 10 a.m., Marcus's phone was exploding. His board demanding a statement. His investors demanding answers. His PR team demanding he get ahead of this before it destroyed everything. But Marcus didn't see any of it. He was in his penthouse. Finally showering. Finally eating. Finally breathing. He didn't check his phone until 11 a.m. And when he did, when he saw the notifications, the headlines, the messages, his blood went cold. He called Victoria immediately. She answered on the first ring. Calm. Composed. I'm handling it, she said before he could speak. Handling what? Marcus's voice was sharp. Dangerous. The story. I leaked it this morning. Controlled narrative. We're getting ahead of it before someone else breaks it badly. Marcus was silent for 3 seconds. Then, you did what? I protected you, Victoria said. Like I always do. The story was going to come out anyway, Marcus. Better that we control how. You made her sound unstable. I made you sound human. You lied. I protected the brand. Victoria's voice hardened. Which is more than you were doing. You can't just visit your dying mother and expect the world not to notice. This is damage control. Marcus's hands shook. Undo it. I can't undo it. It's already everywhere. But I can manage it. We put out a statement. You do an interview. We spin it into a redemption arc. This could actually help us if we... Victoria. His voice was quiet now. Deadly quiet. Undo it. Or I will. He hung up. And for the first time in 8 years, Victoria Langston felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Fear. Not of losing the company, but of losing control of the man she'd built her entire life around. Diane saw the headlines at noon. The hospice had a small TV in her room. She rarely turned it on. But a nurse had left it on the news channel, and there it was. Marcus's face. Her face, pulled from somewhere, an old photograph she didn't know existed. And a story that made her sound like a burden. A problem. Something he'd been forced to manage from a distance. The reporter's voice was professional. Detached. Sources say Reid had been supporting Carter financially for years, though the two were estranged. Questions remain about why the CEO chose to hide this relationship and what it means for his carefully crafted public image. Diane stared at the screen. She didn't cry. She just reached for the remote. And turned it off. When Evelyn, the social worker, came to check on her an hour later, Diane's face was calm. Composed. Did you see the news? Evelyn asked gently. Diane nodded. Do you want to talk about it? Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then, he didn't write it. Evelyn sat down. No, she said softly. I don't think he did. But he let it happen, Diane said. Her voice was steady. No anger. No tears. Just quiet truth. I spent 40 years protecting him. And he spent 10 minutes erasing me. Marcus arrived at the hospice an hour later. Frantic. Desperate. Security trailing behind him because the press had found the location and were camped outside. He burst into the hallway. Ignoring the cameras. Ignoring the shouted questions. He needed to see her. needed to explain. But when he reached room 14, Evelyn was standing in the doorway, blocking him. "She doesn't want to see you right now," Evelyn said quietly. Marcus's face went pale. "Please. I need to explain. I didn't do this. I didn't leak the story." "I know," Evelyn said. "And I think she knows too. But that doesn't change what happened, Mr. Reid." "Please," Marcus said again, his voice breaking. "Please let me talk to her." Evelyn looked at him, and for a moment, her expression softened. Then she stepped aside. But when Marcus walked into the room, Diane didn't look at him. She just stared at the window, at the parking lot, at anything but him. "Mama," Marcus said, his voice raw. "I didn't do this. I swear. I didn't leak that story." "I know," Diane said quietly. "Then why won't you look at me?" "Because it doesn't matter who wrote it, Marcus." Diane's voice was calm. Too calm. "It matters that it was written. That the world thinks I'm some unstable woman you had to manage. That your first instinct, even now, was to hide." "I'm not hiding anymore," Marcus said desperately. "I'm here. You're here now," Diane interrupted. She finally turned to look at him. "But where were you for 10 years? Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I wanted to tell you I was proud of you? That I missed you? That I just wanted to hear your voice?" Marcus's throat closed. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Being wrong isn't the same as being honest," Diane said softly. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Disappointment. Not anger. Not hatred. Just deep, bone-tired disappointment. "I spent 40 years protecting you," she said. "From a world that didn't understand us. From people who said we didn't belong together. From systems that tried to tear us apart." She paused. "And you spent 10 minutes erasing me." Marcus stood there, in the middle of that small hospice room, with security outside and cameras waiting and the world watching. And he realized something that shattered him all over again. He'd enabled this. By hiding. By being ashamed. By letting Victoria make him into a myth instead of a man. He'd given the world permission to erase Diane. And now she was the one paying the price. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But this time, the words felt hollow. Because sorry wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Diane closed her eyes. "Go, Marcus. You have a mess to clean up." He didn't move. "Go," she repeated. Firmer now. And Marcus, after one last look at the woman who'd given him everything, walked out. But this time, he wasn't running. This time, he had a plan. Victoria's Second Chances Foundation Gala was scheduled for that evening. 6 weeks in the planning. 200 guests. Every influencer, investor, and media outlet that mattered. It was supposed to be Marcus's redemption arc. His return to grace. A carefully choreographed evening designed to rehabilitate his image after the scandal. Victoria had written his speech herself. Humble. Grateful. Just enough vulnerability to feel authentic without being weak. She'd even arranged for him to donate $1 million to single mothers in Diane's name. Perfect optics. Perfect spin. Perfect lie. But at 6 p.m., 1 hour before the gala was set to begin, Victoria received a text from Marcus. "I'm not coming." She stared at her phone. Typed back immediately, "You have to. Everything is set. The press is here. The donors are here. Your board is here." 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then, "I'm exactly where I need to be." Victoria's jaw clenched. She called him. He didn't answer. She called his assistant. His driver. His head of security. No one knew where he was. Panic set in. Not because the gala would fail. She could handle that. Could spin it. Could blame his absence on grief or stress or some other PR-friendly explanation. But because for the first time in 8 years, Marcus Reid wasn't following her script. And that terrified her. Marcus was at the hospice. On his knees. Outside room 14. The door was closed. Locked from the inside. "Mama," he said through the wood. His voice hoarse from hours of waiting. "Please. Please let me in." Silence. "I know I failed you," he continued. I know I spent 10 years being a coward. I know I let the world turn you into something you're not. I know I didn't protect you the way you protected me. His forehead pressed against the door. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. Not until you let me make this right. More silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, Diane's voice. How? How what? How are you going to make it right? Marcus took a breath. By telling the truth. All of it. No spin. No PR team. No script. Just me. Standing in front of the world and saying, this is my mother. This is where I came from. And I'm not ashamed anymore. Silence. Then the lock clicked. The door opened. Diane stood there. Thin. Exhausted. But her eyes were clear. It already cost you everything, baby, she said softly. You just didn't notice till now. Marcus looked at her. And nodded. I know. But maybe everything I had wasn't worth keeping. Diane studied his face. Searching for something. Truth, maybe. Or courage. Then she stepped aside. And let him in. Marcus held his press conference the next morning. Not at Reid Global headquarters. Not in some sleek media room with perfect lighting and a podium. In the parking lot of Morrison's laundromat. Where it all started. No PR team. No script. No Victoria. Just him. A microphone. And the truth. The press showed up in droves. Cameras everywhere. Questions shouted before he even began. But Marcus just stood there. Waited for them to quiet down. And when they did, when the only sound was the hum of traffic and the distant rattle of washing machines, he spoke. My name is Marcus Reid, he said. His voice steady. Clear. And I'm here to tell you the truth about who I am. He paused. I was adopted when I was 6 years old. By a black woman named Diane Carter. A laundromat worker who made barely enough to feed herself, let alone a child. But she took me in anyway. Gave me a home. A name. A life. His voice cracked. I built an empire on her sacrifice. And then I pretended she didn't exist. Not because she wasn't enough. But because I was afraid I wasn't. Afraid that if people knew where I came from, if they knew I was raised by a woman who folded other people's laundry for a living, they'd see me differently. Tears streamed down his face now. He didn't wipe them away. So I erased her. I rewrote my story. I called myself self-made when the truth is I was made by her. Every dollar I earned. Every success I achieved. Every breath of the life I built. It was possible because she loved me when no one else would. The press was silent now. Cameras rolling. Recording every word. Diane Carter is the strongest, most selfless person I've ever known, Marcus said. His voice breaking. And if loving her costs me this company, if telling the truth destroys everything I built, then I never deserved it in the first place. He looked directly at the cameras. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that you see her for who she really is. Not the story that was leaked. Not the lie that was told. But the truth. He paused. Swallowed hard. She saved me. And I spent 10 years trying to forget her. That's on me. Not her. Me. The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then another. Until the entire parking lot erupted in applause. But Marcus didn't hear it. Because in the back of the crowd, standing beside a black town car, Victoria Langston stood perfectly still. Watching. And for the first time in 8 years, she realized something that made her blood run cold. She'd lost. Not the company. Not the brand. But the man. The man she'd spent years molding and controlling and building her entire life around. He was gone. And she had no idea how to get him back. So let me ask you something. Do you think public honesty can heal private pain? Or are some betrayals too deep, too rooted, to ever truly be forgiven? Because Marcus just burned down everything he built. And now he has to live in the ashes. The question is, will those ashes grow into something new? Or will they bury him? The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Marcus wasn't there. He'd been asked not to attend. Professional courtesy, they called it. As if watching them dismantle your life was somehow worse than knowing it was happening in a room you couldn't enter. So he sat in his penthouse, former penthouse technically, and waited. Stared at his phone. Watched the clock. And tried not to think about the fact that everything he'd built for 20 years was being decided by 11 people in a conference room on the 42nd floor. The vote came through at 3:47 p.m. A text from his assistant. Former assistant. 7-4. You're out. I'm sorry. Marcus read it 3 times. Set his phone down. And felt nothing. Not devastation. Not anger. Not even relief. Just a strange kind of emptiness where fear used to live. He'd spent 20 years terrified of this moment. Convinced that losing the company would destroy him. That his worth was tied to his title. That without Reid Global, he was nothing. But sitting there, in a penthouse that suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to a life he no longer recognized, Marcus realized something. He'd already lost everything that mattered. 10 years ago, when he stopped returning her calls. Everything since then had just been expensive noise. His phone buzzed again. Different number this time. News alert, Reid Global stock drops 18% following CEO removal. Then another, Victoria Langston named interim CEO. Then another text. From Victoria herself. You chose poverty over power. Just like her. Marcus stared at the message. She'd meant it as an insult. A final jab. Proof that she'd been right all along. But Marcus read it differently. Just like her. Yeah, he thought. Maybe that's exactly what I did. And for the first time in 20 years, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like coming home. He stood. Changed out of his suit, the armor he'd worn for 2 decades. Put on jeans. A hoodie. Sneakers that had been sitting in his closet untouched because billionaires don't wear sneakers to important places. And he left. Not to fight. Not to appeal. Not to salvage what was left. He left to be where he should have been all along. When Marcus walked into room 14, Diane was awake. Propped up slightly. An oxygen tube in her nose now. Her breathing labored but steady. She looked at him. Took in the jeans. The hoodie. The absence of the polished CEO armor he'd worn yesterday. You look different, she said softly. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed. The same one he'd been sitting in for days now. Worn vinyl that had molded to his shape. I am different, he said quietly. Diane smiled. Good. She reached for his hand. He gave it to her. Her grip was weaker now. But still warm. Still her. They voted, didn't they? Marcus nodded. 7-4. I'm out. Diane studied his face. How do you feel? Marcus thought about it. Really thought about it. Lighter, he said finally. Diane squeezed his hand. Good, she repeated. Marcus reached into the bag he'd brought. Pulled out a book. Hard cover. Worn. The spine cracked from years of being opened and closed. Where the wild things are. Diane's eyes lit up. You kept it. Of course I kept it, Marcus said. His throat tight. You gave it to me. She'd read this book to him 1,000 times. When he was 6 and scared and convinced the monsters under his bed were real. When he was 8 and couldn't sleep because he'd had nightmares about being sent back. When he was 10 and just needed to hear her voice. Read it to me, Diane said softly. Marcus opened the book. Cleared his throat. And began. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. His voice wavered at first. Rusty with emotion and memory. But as he read, it steadied. Grew stronger. And Diane closed her eyes. Smiled. Listened. Just like she used to. Except this time, Marcus was the one reading. And she was the one being held. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Marcus was in the hospice cafeteria. Terrible coffee, stale muffins, fluorescent lighting that made everything look gray, when 3 men in expensive suits walked in. He recognized them immediately. David Huang. Margaret Torres. James Okafor. Major investors. The kind who could make or break companies with a single phone call. The kind who'd been at his press conference. Marcus stood. Braced himself for whatever was coming. Lawsuits, maybe. Demands for their money back. Accusations of fraud or breach of fiduciary duty or any of the dozen legal terms he'd heard thrown around in the last 48 hours. But David just extended his hand. "Mr. Reid, we've been trying to reach you." Marcus shook it cautiously. "I haven't been checking my phone." "Understandable," Margaret said. She had kind eyes. The kind that had seen enough of the world to recognize truth when they saw it. "We wanted to talk to you about what's next," James added. Marcus frowned. "What's next?" David smiled. "We're pulling our investments from Reid Global." Marcus's chest tightened. "I understand. The scandal." "Not because of the scandal," David interrupted. "Because we don't want to be part of a company that fired a man for telling the truth." Marcus blinked. "What?" Margaret leaned forward. "What you did, standing up in front of the world and owning your story, choosing your mother over your empire, that's rare. We've been investing for 30 years. We've seen a lot of brilliant CEOs. But we've never seen a billionaire with a conscience." James nodded. "We want to fund your next venture. Whatever it is. Smaller. Purpose-driven. Ethical. We think you could build something that actually matters this time." Marcus stared at them. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Because a month ago, hell, a week ago, this would have been a dream. Validation. Proof that he hadn't destroyed everything. But now it felt wrong. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said slowly. "I really do. But I'm not building anything right now." They exchanged glances. "You're taking time off?" David asked. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not taking time off. I'm just being a son." The words hung in the air. Simple. Honest. Final. Margaret smiled. "Then that's the best thing you could be building." They shook hands. Left their cards. Told him to call if he changed his mind. But Marcus knew he wouldn't. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't building for investors or boards or the world's approval. He was building for an audience of one. And she was dying. When he returned to Diane's room, she was awake. Listening. She'd heard everything through the open door. "You turned them down," she said. Not a question. A statement. Marcus sat beside her. "Yeah. Why?" "Because I'm exactly where I need to be." Diane's eyes filled with tears. But these weren't sad tears. They were proud tears. She reached for his face. Cupped his cheek with a hand that trembled but held steady. "My boy," she whispered. "You finally came home." Marcus covered her hand with his. "I'm sorry it took so long." Diane shook her head. "You're here now. That's all that matters." The days that followed were the hardest and sweetest of Marcus's life. Diane's health declined fast. Faster than the doctors expected. Her body shutting down system by system. Heart. Lungs. Kidneys. But Marcus was there. Every morning. Every night. Every breath in between. They talked about everything. His childhood. Her sacrifices. The things they'd never said because time had felt infinite and saying them had felt too hard. "Do you remember the first night I brought you home?" Diane asked one evening. Her voice weak but clear. Marcus nodded. "I was so scared. I thought you were going to send me back." Diane smiled. "I told you I'd never do that. That you were mine now. You said, 'You're stuck with me, kiddo.'" Diane laughed. A soft, rattling sound. "And you said, 'Promise?'" "Promise," Marcus repeated now. His throat tight. Diane squeezed his hand. "Best promise I ever made." They were quiet for a moment. Just breathing. Existing together. Then Diane spoke again. Softer now. "I used to wonder if I did enough. If I gave you enough." Marcus's chest tightened. "Mama." "No, let me finish," Diane said gently. "I used to lie awake at night worrying that you'd grow up and resent me. That you'd wish you'd been adopted by someone richer. Someone who could give you more." Tears streamed down Marcus's face. "You gave me everything." Diane looked at him. "Did I?" Marcus leaned forward. Took both her hands in his. "You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me love when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You gave me a name. A life. A chance. You gave me everything that mattered, Mama. I just forgot to say thank you." Diane's tears fell now too. You're saying it now. I'm saying it now, Marcus repeated. And they sat there, holding each other. Two people who traveled different roads but ended up in the same place. Home. Diane passed on a Tuesday. The same day of the week she'd collapsed in the laundromat. As if time had come full circle. Marcus was there, holding her hand, watching the monitor slow, beep, slow, beep, slow, and then nothing, just silence, the kind that feels too big for the room. He didn't cry immediately, just sat there, still holding her hand, as if letting go would make it real. The nurse came in, checked for a pulse, turned off the machines. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Marcus nodded. He stayed until sunrise, watching light creep into the room, painting Diane's face in soft gold. She looked peaceful, younger somehow, as if death had lifted the weight of survival off her shoulders. And Marcus, sitting there in his jeans and hoodie, hair unwashed, eyes red, thought about all the things he should have said sooner. All the moments he should have been present for. All the years he'd wasted building things that didn't matter, while the one thing that did slowly slipped away. But he also thought about the last 2 weeks. The conversations. The laughter. The reading. The way she smiled when he walked in. The way she squeezed his hand even when she was too weak to lift her head. The way she'd said, "You're here now. That's all that matters." And he realized something that broke him and healed him at the same time. He hadn't fixed everything. But he'd shown up. And sometimes, showing up is enough. The funeral was 3 days later. Small church. Simple service. Nothing like the spectacle Marcus could have afforded. But hundreds showed up anyway. Laundromat workers. Old neighbors. People from her building. Former customers who'd moved away decades ago but came back when they heard. And every single one of them had a story. About Diane lending the money when rent was due. About Diane babysitting their kids for free when they had to work double shifts. About Diane bringing them groceries when they were sick. About Diane just showing up, being there, loving people who had no one else to love them. Marcus stood at the front, listening, learning, and he realized something that made his chest ache with a bittersweet kind of pride. His mother was rich, just not in the way he'd measured. She'd built an empire too. Not of money or power or stockholders, but of love, connection, community. The kind that doesn't show up on balance sheets, but matters more than anything that does. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus walked to the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and spoke from the heart. "My mother taught me how to build an empire," he said, his voice steady despite the tears. "But I forgot she'd already built one. Made of love, not money. Made of people, not profit. Made of moments that don't show up in Forbes but matter more than any headline ever could." He paused, swallowed hard. "She taught me everything. And I spent 20 years forgetting the most important lesson, that success without love is just expensive loneliness." The church was silent, but it was the kind of silence that felt full, rich, reverent. "I don't know if I can be the man she deserved," Marcus continued. "But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." And when he stepped down, when he returned to his seat in the front row, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness. Not closure. Just peace. 6 months passed. The world moved on the way it always does. Reid Global recovered. Victoria thrived. The scandal faded into the kind of footnote people reference in business school case studies, but don't really remember. But Marcus didn't move on. He moved forward. There's a difference. He used what was left of his personal fortune, considerably smaller after legal fees and settlements and the cost of walking away from a company he'd built, to create something new. The Diane Carter Initiative. A foundation supporting single parents. Funding adoptions. Offering business grants to working-class entrepreneurs who didn't have access to capital or connections or the privilege of starting from anything other than nothing. It was small compared to Reid Global. A fraction of the budget. A fraction of the reach. But it mattered. Every dollar. Every grant. Every family helped. It mattered. The opening ceremony was held in front of Morrison's laundromat. The same place Diane had worked for 40 years. The same place Marcus used to nap on warm towels while she folded clothes that weren't hers. Someone had painted a mural on the side of the building. Diane's face. Larger than life. Smiling that smile Marcus remembered from childhood. Strong. Beautiful. Timeless. The artist had captured something essential about her. Not just her features, but her spirit. The way she made you feel seen. Loved. Like you mattered. Marcus stood in front of it, staring up at his mother. And for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he was home. Not the penthouse. Not the empire. Not the life he'd built trying to forget where he came from. But here. In this neighborhood. In this community. In this truth. Flowers had been left at the base of the mural. Notes. Candles. Tokens of love from people who'd never met Marcus but knew Diane and wanted her remembered. And among them, almost hidden in the back, a small bouquet. Expensive. Professional. The kind you order from a high-end florist. No card. But Marcus knew who'd sent them. Victoria. He picked them up. Looked at them for a long moment. Then set them carefully to the side. Not thrown away. Not destroyed. Just separate. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let the past define your future. And Marcus's future, for the first time, felt like his own. That night, alone in his small apartment, nothing like the penthouse, but infinitely more like home, Marcus opened his laptop. He hadn't been on social media in months. Hadn't checked the news. Hadn't looked at his old life. But tonight, he searched for one thing. Reid global stock price. It had recovered. Fully. Trading higher than when he'd left. Victoria had been right. The company didn't need him. It was thriving. And Marcus felt nothing. No regret. No envy. No longing for what he'd lost. Just quiet recognition that some things aren't meant to last forever. He closed the laptop. Picked up the photograph from his nightstand. The one Diane had held in the hospice. Young Marcus. Gap-toothed smile. Oversized clothes. He looked at it for a long time. And thought about everything that had led him here. The mistakes. The pride. The shame. The distance. The moment he'd finally stopped running. The 2 weeks he'd gotten with her at the end. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough. But it was something. And sometimes, something is enough to build a new life on. Marcus set the photograph back down. Turned off the light. And slept. Not the restless, empty sleep of his penthouse days. But the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who'd finally stopped running from who they were. Some men build empires. Others build monuments. But the greatest thing you can build, the only thing that really matters when the lights go out and the crowds go home and you're alone with the truth of who you are, is a life your mother would be proud of. Marcus Reid lost everything. His company. His fortune. His reputation. But he found something worth infinitely more. He found himself. And in doing so, he found his way home. Not to a place. Not to a building. Not to a life he'd built trying to forget. But to the truth of who he'd always been beneath the suits and the success and the shame. A boy who was loved by a woman who saw him when the world looked away. A son who forgot and then remembered. A man who learned, finally, painfully, beautifully, that the only empire worth building is the one made of love. Diane Carter taught him that. Not with lectures or demands or expectations. But with 40 years of showing up. Of choosing him. Of loving him even when he forgot to love her back. And now, standing in front of her mural, living a life dedicated to honoring what she built, Marcus Reid finally understood. Success isn't measured in dollars or headlines or board votes. It's measured in the lives you touch. The love you give. The truth you're brave enough to own. And by that measure, Diane Carter was the richest person Marcus had ever known. He'd spent 20 years trying to match her. And failed. But maybe that was okay. Because some legacies aren't meant to be matched. They're meant to be honored. And that's exactly what he intended to do. For the rest of his life. So let me ask you something. What would you have done in Marcus's place? Would you have kept the empire? Protected the lie? Held onto the power even if it meant letting go of the truth? Or would you have done what he did, burned it all down to reclaim your soul? Because that's the choice we all face at some point. Not between poverty and power, but between who we are and who we pretend to be. Between the life we built and the life we were meant to live. Between the empire that makes us look successful and the love that makes us whole. Marcus chose love. And it cost him everything. But it also gave him something he'd been missing for 20 years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from success, but the kind that comes from finally being home. And sometimes, that's worth more than all the empires in the world.